I think the biggest move of the night is a trade. And what I'm most excited to talk about is that I kind of think the Nuggets might be really back right now after this deal. So the Denver Nuggets have traded Michael Porter Jr. and a 2032 unprotected first round pick to the Brooklyn Nets. Now for Cam Johnson, I'll finish the trade before we go into this. Now, for people who don't know, in 2032, Nikola Jokic is going to be 37 years old. Nikola Jokic might be so good and his game might be so ground bound that he's still great at 37 years old. I think that's a very distinct possibility. But it seems like that is a high price tag, B, a good price tag for the Brooklyn Nets to use their $17 million of cap space on, because that's ultimately what this deal is to me. It is the Denver Nuggets getting essentially a like-for-like replacement for Michael Porter Jr. that costs $17 million per year less. Now, the one thing I will note, and John Hollinger had to explain this to me, so shout out to John. The Denver Nuggets will now be on the hook in regard to their apron and everything for, I think it's like $3.6 million in unlikely incentives for Cam Johnson. And because of that, they now only have, I think it's like $11.6 million away from the first apron at this point. So they don't quite have full ability to go and use the non-taxpayer mid-level or anything like that. But I think this is an absolute home run for the Denver Nuggets to use this 2032 first round pick to go get a player that, look, I think is like pretty equivalent to Michael Porter Jr. I'll hear out a case if you think he's better than Michael Porter Jr. Honestly, I don't know that I'll hear out the case otherwise that Michael Porter Jr. is better than Cam Johnson. I think he has some upside in terms of the way that he can create shots at times that Cam Johnson doesn't always possess necessarily. But for this specific roster in Denver, I think that this is a fantastic move that just makes an immense amount of sense. It clears their books in a real way to be able to go out and make moves, such as the one that they made immediately after this, although this would have been able to get done anyway, signing Bruce Brown to a vet minimum deal for a year. I love this. I think that this is really, really smart stuff from the Denver Nuggets, and I am really excited to kind of talk through where they go now from here. I did not necessarily think that they were going to be able to like move and shake in this way. I've always had questions about Michael Porter Jr. getting traded, if only because we know what the medical looks like from pre-draft, right? Like the whole reason he fell pre-draft was due to his medicals being a bit poor. So I've always kind of wondered, is he going to clear the, kind of trade physicals and everything that go through whenever you have to do these things? But I do at least think that this is a smart move that clears a lot of space for the Denver Nuggets to get better. And I would bet that after we see what else Denver does here, that I see them as the clear number 2 in the Western Conference, based off of getting Bruce Brown and another really high level player. And I didn't think that would be the case yesterday after what Houston had done and gone and accomplished.
So I feel similarly and this was my reaction as the move was made, because I like Cam Johnson. I thought Brooklyn could have gotten more for Cam Johnson. It almost feels like you would need to attach a first round pick to get off of the Michael Porter Jr. salary. And then the Cam Johnson asset becomes its own separate thing. So to swap one for the other just feels like a home run for Denver. I really like Cam Johnson, especially with what he's now making and how additive and what he commands in an offense. I think he's perfect for what Denver will be. I still have my own internal dialogue about them versus Houston, but maybe we get a them versus Houston playoff series. And I also recognize what Michael Porter Jr. was in that second round, or guess what he wasn't in that second round against OKC. And yet, despite what he wasn't, the Nuggets pushed the now NBA champs to the brink. And there were points in that series. We talked after game 5 where I didn't know who was going to win that series. There were moments in game 5.
Totally.
I thought we were going up 3-2, and this is going to be a young team losing to a veteran team that's won a title before, and this will be part of OKC's growing pains. And now, to your point about what else and what this does for them financially, not only do you get off the Michael Porter Jr. money, but you bring in a solid rotation piece, and it allows you to do much more. Look, this is how you should operate, to Kroenke's point, when you have the best player in the world or one of the best players in the world at the centerpiece of your team. So good on Denver. They're one of the winners of the offseason so far, just with this move alone, not mentioning what else they're able to do.
Yeah, I would say that they have room for a $9 or so million player, somewhere in that ballpark at this point, and then they'll have to sign one more to like a veteran minimum deal as well. I would imagine that one more player might end up being a big, right? Like the veteran minimum player. But being able to go out now and have a roster that looks like Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Cam Johnson, Christian Brown, and they're going to figure out what to do with the Christian Brown extension. I would imagine that that's coming down the pike here in the next, however long. Maybe it's 24 hours, maybe it's 4 months. They go right to the deadline, right in October as possible. But that 5 right there is quite good. And then you throw in Bruce Brown as well. And you throw in Deron Holmes being healthy. Maybe you get a leap from one of Peyton Watson or Julian Strawther, and you have this $9 million a year player. I think that's going to be a really, really big benefit to them. And if I was them, the way I would attack it is minimum guy for the big spot, because I think that they'll be able to find one of those guys, and like wing perimeter player for the other spot. And I'll have to think a little bit more about who that is, and we'll try and figure it out while we're talking maybe, but that's what this kind of screams to me. The one thing I will note about Cam Johnson does not always stay healthy. He does consistently miss time. Like this year, he had the ankle injury. He played 57 games for Brooklyn this year. He played 58 games for Brooklyn the year before. He played 42 games in 2023, 66 games in 2022, 60 games in 21, 57 games in 20. He's never played more than 66 games in a year. You should be going into this with your eyes open if you're a Denver Nuggets fan, that Cam Johnson is probably going to miss somewhere between 15 and 20 games. It's the reality of who he is. But Michael Porter Jr. is also a guy that it tends to be like more, tough injuries. Like, if he gets hurt, he's out for a while injuries. But 81 games and 77 games the last 2 years, even though this year he definitely played injured for a portion of the playoffs at the very least, right? So I do think it's worth going into this like eyes open, like, hey, you're getting Cam Johnson, which allows you to kind of accentuate the depth. But honestly, it probably does mean that you need more depth as well in order to account for the games that Cam Johnson is going to miss as well. But at their ceilings, I think that they're pretty similar players right now at this point for how they fit within the Denver offense at the very least. I wouldn't be surprised to see Michael Porter Jr. We'll talk about Brooklyn in a second here, because the fights between him and Cam Thomas for the ball are going to be pretty amazing. I think that for Denver, this is the exact move that they should have been making. And I'm really excited to see, like, okay, can Denver now find a way to find a taker for Dario Saric's money for a year? I mean, God, if that happens, if they can find somebody that'll just take that money, it's a real, like, they have like full mid-level and might be able to go find somebody that's like really, really good.
It's interesting that you bring up the regular season. Maybe this is just my perceived perspective. That's English. My thought on Denver is that while the regular season does still matter, I think with Jokic, their floor is like a 47 win team, even in this loaded Western Conference anyway. So
Sure.
if Cam Johnson is to miss 25 whatever games, 30 games in the conference, then yes, it does mean you have to account for it. But I don't know. I just like Jokic was my MVP pick last year along with Bryce, and it's because of the turmoil, quote unquote, that you heard was happening with the feud between the front office and the head coach and everything going on there, and the his teammates that missed games, and yet still they won 50 games and were like a solid 4 seed in a loaded Western Conference. And I just that's a Jokic play for me, that their floor with whatever injury scares they may have with Cam Johnson are rooted in whatever Jokic can drag them to. And it's why I'm immediately going to their ceiling here and looking at, I like Cam Johnson much better in a specific role, and a less needy role, which isn't probably the best way to put it, because I like Michael Porter Jr. too, but I think that ship had just kind of sailed. And look, like to your point, everything we're talking about with what they can do afterwards and like the Bruce Brown of it all, like they're going to be able to now get even deeper, and it'll be curious to see what this new front office potentially does.
Yeah, and just kind of looking through free agents for Denver, like guys that would make sense for them. I mean, I know I just said that go, small in the backcourt, find another guy, and then go big with the minimum. I mean, like if they could go sign Larry Nance, I think that'd be like the perfect guy for their team, to be honest with you. Another guy that will miss time via injury, but really, really useful player. I know that Chris Paul wants to go like closer to LA, it seems like. But man, if they sign Chris Paul, I would love this team. Chris Paul can still play a little bit.
Can we do the exercise of, and I know we're going to talk about what else Houston did, but just like where would you have them clearly number 2? Would you have Houston like 2A, 2B? Is there another team I'm not thinking of?
Like maybe Denver signs a player that I'm not all that interested in, right? Like what if they sign like Precious Achiuwa to 1 year, $9 million, because they feel like they need to like use that money, right? I'm not saying they're going to do that, but
I would just personally advise against it. God bless Precious Achiuwa. He's also a Mets fan. I would advise against that personally.
Yeah. So like right now, as of the time that we're publishing this podcast and speaking and, literally doing this live, I think I would have Houston ahead, but it's very close. And in the playoffs, I would have Denver ahead, just because I trust Jokic on some level in the playoffs in a way that this Houston group just hasn't proven yet outside of Kevin Durant, right? So I would be inclined to trust Denver in the playoffs, but in the regular season, I would pick Houston to finish second in the West as of right now. We'll see if that changes. Yeah, man, if I was Denver, I would be. And if you're Chris Paul, man, and you're trying to win a title, like that's the last thing you got to do. I don't think you're getting a better spot than this one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Man.
Especially coming after Russ was there last year. That'd be such an upgrade. This is not even like a disrespect to Russ. I thought he had a great season for what they asked him to do in Denver, but it's just like when I talk about adding the other smartest mind that we've seen as a ball handler next to Jokic, I'm right there with you. Yeah.
And then the other one that someone brought up here in the comments is Al Horford to Denver. That'd be fun too. Al Horford, I think, is a little closer to being cooked than what Chris Paul is. But they're probably, I don't know. Horford was pretty good last year for Boston. Started a number of games for them and was okay in the playoffs. He looks a little bit slower in terms of his movement skills at this point, which is really the added benefit of having Al Horford at this point. But I mean, they have some guys that they can go get that I think would be really, really valuable for them. I think they're in a really positive position. I think they've really upgraded this roster now and positioned themselves to upgrade this roster, maybe is the better way to put it, throughout the course of this thing. And the other thing is, like, what if you did a thing where, because you can use the mid-level exception as a trade exception at this point, what if you found a taker for Dario Saric in a deal and you went out and you got like a $14 million a year player and the other team has a trade exception that they can just fit Saric into, right? So, you basically structure it as like two separate swaps, kind of. That's one that also kind of tracks for me a little bit in a fun way, at the very least.
Anyone come to mind for you? That 14 or so-ish $1 million player?
So if they are going to stay below the first apron, I would imagine that Denver is going to try and stay below the tax this year, just because it makes sense to do so, frankly. The reason for that being that they've been in the repeater for a few years now, and given that they're so close, it might make sense to use this year as the year where you get under and then you can shoot back over when you're trying to build the rest of the roster out. I was trying to kind of figure out if there was a sign and trade for like a Trey Mann, but Trey Mann's a free agent. Like if you just want to do Trey Mann, you could do Trey Mann. But like, could you do something like, I'm really trying to think of a name. You know what I mean? I don't know that I like full scale have a name right now where it like ticks all of the boxes necessarily. But I mean, I actually do know what the name is, but this guy will cost too much. Like Kobe White, like fits within this number now. You know what I mean? But it just, he costs too much asset wise that they just don't have in order to be able to make a deal for him.
Counterpoint. Counterpoint. Are we sure that you actually have to give up that much to get a valuable asset from the Chicago Bulls?
Counterpoint Bulls.
Right. Like Counterpoint Bulls is my counterpoint there.
I'd be surprised, I think, is what I would say. I would be surprised. Yeah, look, I think there are names out there that can work for them, though, is what I would say. For the Brooklyn Nets, I think this is a deal that makes a lot of sense. Like I said at the top here, having said that, this is actually a good name, Ayo Dosunmu. If you wanted to go find somebody like this, if I was them, I might try and go do something for Ayo Dosunmu. But again, they don't have a ton of assets is the issue. You're really trying to get like a guy that is probably on expiring, that is more of like a guard type who can create a little bit of offense. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. I would guess that the Bulls aren't just giving away Dosunmu, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Who knows? Yeah, your face, Andrew, is not wrong.
Just counterpoint Bulls, man. I would walk in and just wait until they say no before you actually decide they won't do something.
It's a fair point. Okay, so for the Brooklyn Nets, they get this 2032 first round pick. I think that's a huge win for them. They're probably ecstatic to use $17 million on Michael Porter Jr., who is an upside swing for them, at least on some level. Maybe he can get back to, I don't think he has quite the flexibility he had when he was younger, obviously, to be able to create shots in the way that he did when he was a young player. But they could look at it and say, hey, we're going to give him the opportunity to go nuts. And maybe he averages 23, 25 a game for a bad team in Brooklyn. And, we'll see where he stands going into the 2026 summer when he'd be on an expiring contract, right? I think he played hurt for the playoffs. Like, I don't think what we saw in the playoffs was the real Michael Porter Jr. So we'll see what that looks like. The big thing, though, for me is just the Nets are clearly just trying to accumulate assets, paying $17 million to get like a really high-end Denver first-round pick for when Jokic is 37 years old. It makes sense to me.
Again, I maintain that I thought Cam Johnson's value was a little higher, but to what you're talking about in getting something back for the future and accumulating the asset, and if he plays healthy, maybe you could. How many years does he have left? Like, there's no way you can reroute him so could you reroute him at the deadline if he's a productive piece?
Maybe. I think you're more likely to reroute him either next summer or at the deadline the following year. I would guess he's in Brooklyn for next year.
Right. I mean, look, I'm still very curious about their draft night plans and the needs.
Aren't we all?
Right. So just like that has to inform how I also feel about getting another guy that needs the ball. You know, you have a lot of young cooks in said kitchen, and now you add another veteran one. And not that Michael Porter Jr. can't play off ball, but is he going to play off ball toward Jaeger Demon and like a lot of the rookies that you now have, you know?
That's what my question is Michael Porter Jr. was happy to play off the ball next to Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. Is that going to continue to be the case when it's Jaeger Demon, Cam Thomas, Ben Suraf at some point, Nolan Traore, etc.? I'm interested to see if that will be the case. I don't know that will be the case.
Yeah.
He might see this as his chance to like go be the Jeremy Grant, right? Instead of being the role player, go be like the number one option, right? So
I hate to say it, but there is a very recent example of a guy that was fine playing off the ball that went to Brooklyn in a trade and did whatever he wanted on offense and then ended up not being that happy in Brooklyn. Now, I don't think they're getting 5 picks from their crosstown rival, obviously because they can't, but like 5 picks for like they did for Mikal Bridges in Brooklyn. But it did not seem like it went all that well in Brooklyn when they had Mikal in place there. So I think that this is between Michael Porter Jr. and what he potentially could look at this year as, and going from a situation where you're a contender to now in a very clear situation where you're not, and how you approach it. So from the actual Nets perspective, in a vacuum, I don't hate getting an asset like that in the future. I just have questions about what this year actually looks like for them and how they implement all these different pieces they have.
I'm also just not sure exactly what they're building toward a little bit. Like what are you trying to accomplish, I guess? Because you don't really have like a huge upside swing on the roster. Like Oklahoma City during their rebuilding years had Shea, right? And Shea was not considered an MVP guy when he was there at first, but was certainly a huge upside swing that they took a chance on in the Paul George deal, right? I don't see Jaeger or any of these other rookies this year as quite that. So it feels like they're just like kind of spinning their wheels a little bit to me, unfortunately, at this point. And that is what would be concerning to me if I was a Nets fan.